Leviticus and Numbers, and actually I should say into Deuteronomy as well. He's going to repeat it again. He's going to remind them to say, hey, you heard it. It's not just me saying it. You heard it yourselves. Now, as I begin, before I get into the text of Exodus 20, I want us to turn to the book of Deuteronomy, speaking of how Moses is going to remind them. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, when he's reminding them about what God spoke to them. Deuteronomy 5, verse 1. And Moses called all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your hearing today, that you may learn them and be careful to observe them. The Lord our God made the covenant with us. Notice he didn't say with me, with us in Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers. I want you to note this. He didn't make it with our fathers, but with us. Those who are here today, this very moment, in other words. All of us who are alive. The Lord talked with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up to the mountain. Now skip down to verse 22. These words the Lord spoke to all your assembly in the mountain from the midst of the fire, the cloud and the thick darkness, with a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on the 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. So again, he's going to repeat this later on in the book of Exodus, and again back in Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus. He's going to repeat it, reminding them, hey, it wasn't just for me. You didn't hear it only from my lips. You heard it directly from God. Because Moses, actually I should say the Israelites, are going to go away from God, and they're going to make excuses. And we're going to see these excuses, the things that in their mind they deceive themselves, rationalizing like, hey, God is not real, or God is gone, God is dead, Moses is dead, I should say. So we should make our own gods. We're going to see this in a little bit. And notice here too that he's going to point out that he spoke to them and not their ancestors, their forefathers. Now notice also as we begin in this chapter that nowhere in this chapter does God said, this is my law. I know that we know them, the 10 Commandments, as the law. And it is. But nowhere does God say, this is my law, and you have to follow it or else you're dead, even though he will explain to them there are consequences. You don't. Neither does he say these are only 10 commandments, because later on, as we get later into Leviticus, he's going to expound as to the meaning of each one of these 10 commandments. Now, these religious leaders, they're going to take the 10 commandments, simple 10 commandments, and they're going to create, over the expansion of the years, 613 laws. They're going to be nitpicking at every single little thing, specifically, when it comes to the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath. They're going to say, no, you can't pick up this plate, you can't pick up that dish, you can't walk from here to there, you can't. They're going to make it so difficult that later on, Jesus, this is why I was thinking Matthew 22, because Jesus is contending with these religious leaders, calling them to their face, hypocrites. Now, the 10 Commandments and the U.S. Constitution are very similar. Our founding fathers of this country, though not all of them were Christians, not all of them were believers, they all agreed that the 10 Commandments were the right principles that we as a country ought to follow. And so it is very similar in the way it was constructed, the U.S. Constitution. Because we are not shackled In the same way that we're not shackled to the law, we're not shackled to the commandments of the Constitution. We have freedom, in the same way that we have freedom in Christ, but there are consequences when we step out of bounds. Laws were created for the lawbreaker. If we simply live according to God's ways, there's nothing to worry. Before I got saved, I don't know why, maybe you can relate, but every time I would see a police officer, a police car right behind me, I would go into panic mode. They're behind me. I'm going to get pulled over. I'm going to get a ticket. No matter what, I mean, I didn't do nothing. Now I see a police car behind me. Sometimes I just pass them. And not that I'm speeding, I just simply pass them. It's like, no big deal, I'm doing nothing wrong. But before, I used to be terrified of the police. I'm going to break the law. But they're simply looking specifically for me. For what? I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing. Because since high school, up to now, I have not received a ticket. I haven't pulled over, but, hey, you got a broken light. Hey, you made a turn where you shouldn't have. Hey, you missed the speed limit right here. Those kind of little things. But other than that, laws are made for the lawbreaker. Now, these 613 laws, well, you're not worthy of that. Do it to the law, to the T. Now, these 10 commandments that we know as the law, they're simple. God can't just be asking us for these things. There's got to be more. So let's actually, for us too, Christians, we think simply believing by faith is too easy. That's it. That's all we got to do. So let's pick it up again. I know I briefly covered verse 1 through 3 last time, but let's look at it again. Verse 1. And God spoke these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. God reminded them here, he specifies it here, I brought you out. Not because you earned it, not because you deserved it, not because of anything you did. I brought you out of the land of bondage. Bondage. They were in full sin. Now, it wasn't originally their fault, but it is their fault at this moment. And I'm going to explain how, because we are similar in the same way that even though we were brought up in a specific way, none of us have a story to tell. All of us, at one point or another, we led or lived in a rough relationship with our parents or past lives, no matter what. But it doesn't mean we stay there. For them too, though they were brought up, most of them, as slaves, doesn't mean they're going to be slaves forever. I think I spoke about this a week ago or so, but I know I mentioned it in the men's conference, that even though we were brought up a specific way, we're not under a curse per se. It ends with us no matter what. Is it difficult? Yes, it is difficult. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. Ephesians 2, verse 8 says, For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, or other versions say a free gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. In other words, you can't earn it. There's no way that you can rack up points. You can't merit it. No, it's a free gift from God. Now, when God says here in the first commandment, no other gods before me, he wasn't referring to, or he's not saying Okay, as long as you keep me as number one, you can have other gods. That is not what he's talking about. No other gods before me. There's different ways to view this, and I think they all make sense. They all can mean the same thing. No other gods before me. In other words, don't bring any other little g gods, idols, or anything you worship before my face. It's an insult. Take it away from me. Take it away from here. No other gods could also mean before me, or other, I should say, other than me. Not before me, not after me. No, nothing else, period. No other gods. Now, we look at verse 1 and 2, and we can clearly see and understand how God meant it. I am the supreme God. Nothing, no one, again, before or after me. Nothing else, period. Um, it is and it was an insult to God, the true God, to worship anyone or anything other than Himself. In Isaiah chapter 65, verse 3, it says, "You are my people, who provoke me to anger continually to my face." In other words, these things that they were doing, who sacrifice in gardens and burn incense on altars of bricks. What Isaiah is saying, or God through Isaiah is saying, you do this when you're supposed to be worshiping me. Instead, you're doing these hideous things, sacrificing in gardens, these gardens that Isaiah is speaking about. There were areas where they would come and do perverse things. I'm not going to get into the details of this verse, but that's what it was saying. And you sacrifice in these places. And you shouldn't have, God is saying, you should not have any other God other than myself, period. Nothing else. And He's going to say, because I am a jealous God. And look at verse 4. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that it is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God. I'll pause right there. We all know that technology is advancing very, very rapidly nowadays, especially with AI technology. How quickly these robots and how realistic these robots are becoming. How now there's so much or so many vehicles that drive themselves, taxis. There are no drivers in them. These human or android human-like robots are so realistic. And what's to say about what's called deep fake? You know, and since I like music, I often run into videos where they show a mixture of, and I recently saw this one, of Vicente Fernandez, who's a Mexican singer, using his voice to do a Snoop Dogg song. And it's the voice. That's how advanced technology is. And how they take the voice of one artist, mix it with the other one, and create a different song. Now, recently, uh, um, I ran across this probably about 2 weeks ago about this very concerning image that I found online. Not because I was searching, I wasn't even searching for that specific image. Many of you know what the Shroud of Turin is. This I think it's about 10 feet long linen, which is believed, most believe that this is the linen that Jesus was wrapped in when He was buried. And because it has markings where uh, it is believed that He was about 5'7" and the markings on His back, the cuts on His face, the lashes, um, where the markings of the thorns will be on His head. And so, some reconstruction has been done because of the image, but recently, with the help of AI, they made a very, vivid image recreation of what Jesus Christ would have looked like. Now, to me, as a person, as an individual, whatever, no big deal. However, the concerning part of it is that because we are prone to do this, humans, people are going to run with it. They're going to make images, statues. Some of us probably have family members who in their living rooms have the image of Jesus. What is that called? The Sacred Heart of Jesus, and uh, all kinds of things, including Christian believers. Now, there's nothing wrong if you have like the Last Supper, because we know that we don't worship these things. But it is concerning because now people are going to say, hey, this is true. AI figured it out. And they're going to make these statues. Now, we know, and God specifically says, do not make anything, period, nothing, no AI. Even though AI did not exist there, God knew that today we're going to have this technology in our hands. No image, no carved image, nothing. Nothing that looks like anything. Why? Because we're prone to worship. And notice how it says here in the first part of verse 5, for I, the Lord your God, I am a jealous God. Now, jealousy for God that he's speaking about, this jealousy is not like we know human jealousy. There's a healthy jealousy between a husband and a wife. That's, again, healthy. But he's not speaking of that kind of jealousy. Not that kind of jealousy. God is talking about, I am exclusive, ought to be exclusive. I am the only true God. And that's what God is saying. You should not have any images, because then you're going to turn to that image instead of me. No portraits, no nothing. And specifically, he was speaking to Israel because they were already copying Israel. I'm sorry, they were already copying Egypt and what they were doing in following their ways of worship, having idols. Because again, what I said earlier, how we opened up, that Moses will remind them later on. And again, a different portion of scripture that he's going to remind them again in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2 again. He's going to say to them, the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. You only heard a voice. In other words, don't make up any image. You didn't see anything. You only heard his voice. And Moses reminds them of this principle here in Deuteronomy, because the Bible does say that we ought to not worship any idols, any images, but we are to worship in word and in spirit. John chapter 4, verse 24 says, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. What happens if we don't? What happens if we don't worship this way? Or what happens if we worship idols or images or anything other than God himself? Look at this, the latter part of verse 5. He will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to the thousands to those who love me and keep my commandment. Did you know that the Roman Catholic religion removed this specific commandment from the Ten Commandments? It doesn't exist in their Bible. But they still have 10 commandments. What they did is that they took the 10th commandment and split it into two. So they took out this one, making an idol, because we know they have idols, images that they worship, saints that they worship. And they took the 10th commandment where it says, do not covet your neighbor's wife. That's commandment number 9. And then they made number 10, do not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. We're going to look at it later on. But that's how they got away. And because people don't read their Bibles, and I'm speaking about others, Christians, what I mean by Christians, they carry the label, they're not really believers, who don't read the Bible. They simply say, oh, okay, the priest, the person that's up there, he said it, okay, we believe it, we trust him. This is one of the reasons why so many people have been misled and become entrapped in sin, not knowing. But going back to the text, why would God judge, or in other words, punish the sins of someone up to the third and the fourth generation if it wasn't their fault? Why would he punish them? Well, he's not punishing the people themselves for this reason, for the sins of somebody else. What it's saying here, those who hate me. Notice it says here to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. In other words, they learned it from somebody else, yet they continue to do the very same thing over and over and over, even though you know it is incorrect. What I was saying earlier and what I shared with the men's conference is that we know it's wrong. And we have the way out of this quote unquote curse. Stop doing what you've been doing. You know that this is wrong. Where it says here to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, it could better read those who continue to commit the sins of their ancestors. The writer of Second Kings, which it could possibly be Jeremiah, he writes in 2 Kings 14, verse 6, the fathers shall not be put to death. The latter part of verse 6. The fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall the children be put to death for their fathers. But a person shall be put to death for his own sin. Each one of us are guilty of our own sin. You can't say, well, I did it because so and so made me do it. Or I did it because he provoked me, she provoked me, or in the heat of the moment. No. We're guilty for our own sin, but a person shall be put to death for his own sin. Now, we're not going to be put to death. That sounds extreme. But God was making an example back then. That's why it says that people will be put to death for their sins. Verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. There are three main ways in which people, including us Christians, take God's name in vain or insult his name, profane his name. One of them is profanity, cursing, cussing. Why should there be any foul language coming out of any so-called believer? Paul instructs us no foul language should be found in you. Just like the Israelites were supposed to be an example to the rest of the world, so are we supposed to be an example. And again, I go back to what I said. Just because we were brought up in a certain environment where I'm sure there was a lot of cussing, doesn't mean we have to pick it up. Doesn't mean we have to carry it continually. I've worked, and I know you do too. I work around, or used to work around, um, unbelievers, especially in the construction site, where men are just rough, and they use language, and women too. I've been around construction where there's these women. It's like, man, you put me to shame. I mean, I blush when I'm around you because of those words that you use. Profanity. The other one is in a kiddish or foolish, frivolous way, using the OMG loosely. Oh my goodness, and you know what I'm trying to say. Another way is a hypocrite way, claiming to be Christians, saying we're Christians, yet we act and we live contrary to him. In front of other Christians, we can act the part. But when those Christians are not looking at us, do we blend in with the rest of the world? That is the way that we take God's name in vain. And it's easy for us to blend in with the rest of the world because they don't know. They don't know if we're Christians. They don't know what a Christian looks like. Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 says, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. So we're supposed to keep his name hallowed. What does hallowed mean? To be holy, to set it apart, to be sanctified, to be special, unique. You know, when something's special, something unique, you don't use it often. You only take it for special occasions. Well, this is beyond the special occasion, the name of God. Though these religious people took it way, way beyond to the point where, like, we can't even pronounce his name. We should not pronounce his name. We shouldn't even let the people pronounce his name the right way. Why not? I mean, it doesn't say we can't, sound out his name. It's just that we have to be keeping it hallowed, holy. Jeremiah 23, God is rebuking the people through Jeremiah. And he says in Jeremiah 23, verse 26 and 27, how long, Jeremiah 23, 26, how long would this be in the heart of the prophets who prophesy lies? Indeed, they are prophets of the seed of their own heart, who try to make, and other translations say, and I like this other one better, who teach my people to forget my name by their dreams, which everyone tells his neighbor, as their fathers forget my name for Baal. They were teaching the people to forget the name of God. And they took it to the extreme where they even removed, and I think Mr. Joe has spoken about this in the men's study, how they removed certain letters of the name of God so that people would not pronounce it. Certain Jewish people, certain religions do not pronounce the name of God. For example, if they write God, they'll remove the O. No, God's name is holy. And we carry his name, but we ought not to just simply blur it out like it's no big deal. Just think about this, your name. Say, insert your name instead of God. Oh my Joel. Oh my Joel. Excuse me, Joel. And Joel this. Oh my Joel. For Joel's sake, just think about that. How annoying that would be to you because of your name. Now, increased in amount to the name of God. To millions of people repeating it over and over. That's what it means. We have to hold the name of God holy, but it is not prohibited for us to repeat it. It's his special name. And the Israelites, according to Jeremiah, they were teaching the people to forget the name of Yahweh, Yehovah, God himself. Instead, they were, hey, let's pronounce Baal instead, in a sense. Let's go back to Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Hallowed it. Now the word Sabbath or Shabbat in the book of Hebrews, or in the Hebrew language, I should say, not in the book of Hebrews, sorry. In the Hebrew language, it means stopping or resting or ceasing. In other words, putting a stop, pause. That's what Sabbath means in the Hebrew language. Now, in the Hebrew or in the Jewish calendar, they would and they still follow the Friday sunset to Saturday sunset as it being their Sabbath day. Sabbath day, the day of rest. Now, some religions who are not Jewish follow, which there's nothing wrong if you keep it as your family, if that's your conviction. But if you're keeping it as a religious right, as a religious thing, I do it or I'm committing a sin, that's not for us. Claiming to be a Christian and saying, if I don't keep the Sabbath according to what God's word says, I'm going to commit a sin. No, you're not. Nowhere does it say that you, the Christian, New Testament believer, you need to follow this. Now, it's a good principle. It's a great thing to do. But we're not, again, shackled by it. We're not shackled by it. In the NIV, verse 6 says, remember the Sabbath day, keeping it holy. NIV says, keeping it holy. The NIV gives an action, it adds action. It gives it an action implication. This is how you make it holy, by keeping it, by doing it, being intentional. In other words, knowing that the Sabbath day is coming, prepare for it. Make it holy. Keep it holy. Hallow it. Again, being intentional by taking time to rest from all work. Now, what about, think in terms of you being a farmer. Let's say you have cattle, you have chickens, you have, who knows, other farm animals. And you worked all week long, you get to the sixth day, but what about the seventh? You're not going to feed them? You're not going to give them any water? No, God said I can't do that. Well, it doesn't truly mean this. Now, they took it to the extreme. Doesn't mean you can't go give your animal water. Doesn't mean you can't give your animal food. Doesn't mean you can't let it out of the barn just for a little while and then bring him back. In other words, what it truly means is to make sure you're intentional to keep this day holy, to be able to refocus yourself back to God. Back to God. That's what God wanted to make sure. Because remember, He created, and we read it right now, He created everything in 6 days, the heavens, the earth, everything. And He kept the last day, the Sabbath day, as a resting day. Now, we Christians, we observe this day as a special day on Sundays, which is the first day of the week. Now, I've had multiple times people ask, why do Christians worship God on the first day and not the Sabbath day of the week? Why is that? And if we do this, and we've been criticized as Calvary chapels, we've been criticized to say that we are breaking the law of God. That we are breaking the law because we meet on a Sunday, the first day, and not the Sabbath day. Now, that is true. Again, Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, that is the Sabbath. I have no disagreement with that. But we worship on the first day of the week, Sunday, because we are in His rest. He is our rest. And I'm going to emphasize this more on our next study, because that's really going to take a longer study. We rest in Him. We're going to look at Hebrews to see what God says, Hebrews chapter 4 specifically, about Jesus being our rest, our Sabbath. But we begin because we begin in Him. He rose on the first day of the week. So we begin on the first day of the week by worshiping Him. Now we keep it holy, or they are to keep it holy. And God intended it this way to be able to keep the dignity of men and women, workers, strangers, visitors, giving the animals rest, and including machines. Even though, back then there was no machines, but God knew eventually these machines were going to exist. If you constantly run a machine, Think about it. Mr. Joe works in a factory. If you don't take that machine out of commission for a few hours, for a few days, it's going to eventually break down. We are not machines. And if we constantly go, 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 and do not rest, we're going to break down. You all hear me say this often, I'm going to repeat it often. We all tend to want to work that extra 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of overtime, or that extra day out of the week because God knows I need the income, so He understands me. But one thing that we forget about this, yes, if you do it for a specific amount of time, I'm not saying it's wrong completely. If you agree with your spouse that you do it for a specific time, okay. But eventually that becomes an idol because you get accustomed to working and working and working, and you forget. That becomes a pattern that you learn, your body learns, and now it has to repeat it over and over and over. And we want the income. And we use that excuse, well, God understands me. One of the things that we forget is that when do we trust in God for Him to provide all our needs? Now we want. That's why we're working. But shouldn't we be satisfied in the way or what God gives us? I'm not saying be lazy either. There has to be a balance. That is the key right there. You have to have a balance. And so God wanted us humans, and specifically them, the Israelites, to refocus. Because remember, they came out of captivity. They were slaves. So they were constantly working and working. They were being worked literally to death. And so they learned that this is the pattern. This is how they ought to live. Constantly working, working, working. No rest. Keep going. Day in, day out. And so God had to, in a sense, put boundaries to us humans. And He was the first example because He did it at the beginning of creation. 6 days He labored, and on the 7th day He rested. And when He rested, He looked at His entire creation, Genesis 1:31, and it says, "It is very good indeed." Very good. Now this weekly return again, routine, again helps us to be refocusing again in Jesus. Back to Jesus. Focus back to Jesus. So for us, we do this on Sundays, Sunday mornings. It ought to be our one devotion to reconnect back with God and back with our family. Not, okay, I'm going to church and then afterwards I got to go with the buddies. I'm going to go here and there, shopping spree, whatever. Now, holidays are coming up. That's a completely different story. But on a regular basis, it ought to be reconnecting with your family, reconnecting with God, and rest. Relax. It's okay to relax. Mark chapter 8, verse 36 and 37 says, "For what will it profit a man if he gains the entire world and loses his own soul? Or what would a man give in exchange for his soul?" And in exchange, my answer to this will be that they want everything from the world. They're willing to give it up. They, meaning us humans, are willing to give up everything. And so we think that we gain the world. Now, in our next study, I'm going to stop right here with these first 4 commandments. These first 4 commandments all relate to God, us with God. Now, there's 6 more commandments that we're going to look at, but these next 6 commandments, notice there's 6 of them, not 5 and 5. 6 are in relation to us with other humans, our relationship with humans. So even though it is important that we relate to God, notice how much more emphasis God puts in our relationship with other humans. And in our next study, we're going to look at, if you want to take a quick peek, Uh, Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 through 17. That is Colossians 2, 16, 17. Then Galatians chapter 4, verse 9 through 11. Then Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9 through 11. And we're going to focus on Jesus being our Sabbath, being our rest. And the reason I wanted to stop this because I want to focus again more on this fourth commandment, keeping the Sabbath holy. And then we're going to move forward with the rest of the commandments. Let's pray. Dear Lord,